The vacuum of space was silent, but the planet below seemed even more so. Karesh-7 rotated slowly, covered in the colossal ruins of a civilization that, according to all records, had been extinct for millennia. The Earth fleet hovered in orbit, monitoring the descent of the first troops. Among them was Captain Dain Lorak, watching the post-apocalyptic horizon as his ship landed on the surface. The landscape was desolate. Crumbling towers pointed at the blackened sky as if trying to shout a final warning. However, the sensors registered no signs of life. No sound, no movement. Just the icy breeze blowing through the wreckage. This was supposed to be a simple mission. Explore, recover technology, and establish an outpost. Resistance would be non-existent. But Dain wasn't convinced. "I don't like it," he muttered over the comm. "We've seen worlds destroyed before, but never like this. Never so empty." Scientist Renna Vasquez adjusted her helmet visor, analyzing the wreckage ahead. The Karesh-7 civilization was highly developed. They built megacities, generated energy from the vacuum itself. How did they just disappear? Dain had no answer. As his team dispersed to set up an initial camp, something caught his eye. One of the partially destroyed towers was still emitting a pale blue glow. Residual energy. A sign that some technology was still working. He walked towards the structure, followed by two soldiers. The air inside the building was dry and impregnated with a strange electricity. Amidst the rubble, a huge circular structure gleamed with alien markings. It was some kind of portal or transmitter, but it seemed to have been inactive for centuries. Until a pulsating light began to shine in its center. "Captain, do you see that?" asked one of the soldiers, his voice trembling. I think I heard something." Dain didn't have time to reply. A shout cut the communication channel, followed by noises and interference. All eyes turned away from the tower. One of the camps was under attack. But there was nothing visible. Weapons were raised. Sensors activated. No sign of life. No movement. Just shadows dancing among the rubble. And then the first soldier fell. Chaos ensued. Shots cut through the air as soldiers fired into the void. Invisible targets, enemies who weren't there. Panic gripped the troops as more men began to disappear, swallowed up by an invisible force. Dain shouted over the comms. "Fall back to base. Everyone back to base now." The soldiers ran, but not all of them made it. The motion sensors were flashing wildly, as if something was around, something the devices couldn't fully pick up. Renna Vasquez was trying to collect data. "It's not a traditional enemy, Dain. There's an electromagnetic anomaly. That's not normal." Inside the temporary base, the team regrouped. Their faces were pale, their breathing labored. The monitors displayed incomprehensible readings, pulses of energy appearing and disappearing like distant echoes. And then came the worst discovery. The recordings from the body cameras showed soldiers being lifted into the air by an invisible force, their bodies twisted as if something was consuming them from the inside. But this was no ordinary attack. It was a process. Something was absorbing them. Renna clenched her teeth. "Dain, I think we're fighting something we can't see. Or worse. Something we shouldn't have found." Outside, the silence of Karesh-7 became a whisper, gradually growing. And then the echoes of the war began to answer. The makeshift base vibrated with growing tension. The remaining soldiers checked their equipment, while the engineers tried to reinforce the defenses. But there was no battlefront, no trenches. The enemy was everywhere and, at the same time, nowhere. Renna worked frantically, analyzing the data collected from the attacks. "Dain, this energy isn't just a residual effect. Seems to have a pattern like a code. This could be a transmission. Or a call." "Called for what?" Dain asked while loading his rifle. Before Renna could answer, the base's systems were hit by brutal interference. Screens flashed, lights went out and a deafening buzz filled the air. Then a voice came over the comms. An alien voice, distorted, speaking unknown words. And when the lights came back on, The shadows inside the base moved. Chaos broke out inside the base. Soldiers were firing at shadows that were moving too fast to be seen clearly. Screams echoed through the corridors as spectral forms broke through walls, taking over bodies, corrupting the reality around them. Renna screamed as the monitors exploded into sparks. "This isn't just an attack, Dain. They're awakening." Dain grabbed his communicator. "All survivors, regroup in the main bay. We need a plan now." The shadows converged, their voices whispering words that no one understood. But one thing was clear. Karesh-7 had never been uninhabited. It was just asleep. Dain and the survivors set up barricades in the main bay, trying to buy time. Renna manipulated a makeshift transmitter, trying to decipher the alien message. "This isn't an invasion, it's a trial," exclaimed Renna. "They were waiting for someone to wake them up. And now we're being tested." The shadows materialized in the form of translucent colossi. Voices echoed, reverberating in the soldiers' minds. "You have invaded the domain of the gods of the void. You will now be weighed in the scales of existence." Dain raised his weapon, determined. "Then let them come. We will fight to the end." The trial began. The shadows advanced like a devouring wave, while the soldiers struggled to contain the inevitable. Plasma shots pierced the specters without effect. The barricades erected in the main bay trembled under the growing pressure of the attack. Soldiers' shouts echoed through the corridors of the base, while darkness engulfed those who hesitated for an instant. Dain realized that this wasn't a physical battle. "They're testing us. This war can't be won with conventional weapons." Renna, sweating and wide-eyed, tried to interact with the makeshift transmitter. "If we fail here, humanity will be erased from history. We're being evaluated. We need to understand what they want." The shadows spread like tentacles across the metal structures, sucking energy from the equipment. The lights flickered frantically before going out for good. The base was plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the ghostly glow of the entities that were now taking shape. They were colossi, humanoid figures with indescribable features, their every movement distorting the space around them. Their voices reverberated in the minds of the soldiers, words that belonged to no known language, but which carried a clear meaning. "You dared to upset the balance. Now you will be weighed in the scales of existence." Dain felt a shiver run down his spine. "If we can't fight them physically, how do we win this war?" Renna continued her analysis. "They don't want destruction. They want to know if we're worthy. This is a trial." Outside the base, the sky of Karesh-7 began to glow with an unfamiliar pattern of lights. Something was awakening on the horizon. Ships from the Earth fleet in orbit were sending desperate messages. "We're detecting a singularity forming above your position. You have to get out of there now." But there was no way out. Reality itself around the base seemed to bend, as if the planet was being consumed by a cosmic entity. Dain grabbed Renna's arm. "If this is a trial, how do we prove we're worthy?" Renna closed her eyes, processing all the information she had gathered. "They are living memories, echoes of an extinct civilization. They don't want our annihilation. They want to know if we've learned." One of the shadows advanced, enveloping one of the remaining soldiers. Instead of screaming, the man remained motionless. His body floated for a moment before being returned to the ground, unharmed. The entity retreated. Something had changed. "We can't beat them with force," muttered Dain. "We need to show that we understand." The shadows hesitated. The test was about to reach its conclusion. The fate of humanity depended on what would happen in the next few moments. Karesh-7 trembled as if it were about to collapse. The sky, once dark, was now filled with luminous vortices, tearing at the fabric of reality. The shadows, now colossal, loomed over the survivors, watching, waiting. The voice of the entities echoed in the minds of the soldiers, reverberating like silent thunder. "Do you understand the meaning of balance? Or are you just another civilization perishing in the face of the void?" Dain Lorak clenched his fists, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The rifle in his hands seemed useless now. If our survival depends on proving that we have learned, then we need to show them something that no war can teach. Renna Vasquez looked at the data on the makeshift transmitter. The energy pattern of the shadows changes when we respond with logic rather than violence. They are an echo, a record of a civilization that lost itself to its own arrogance. What destroyed Karesh-7 was a war against an enemy they didn't understand. Perhaps similar to what we're facing now. One of the soldiers, startled, fired his weapon at one of the entities. The plasma beam passed through the creature without effect, but the response was immediate. The shadow expanded, engulfing the shooter in a dense fog. He fell to the ground seconds later, pale and inert. Renna shouted, "Don't attack! They're not killing us. They're evaluating us." Dain approached the soldier's body and realized that he was still breathing, but unconscious. It was as if he had been momentarily disconnected, removed from the equation. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. They want to know if we deserve to move on. If we refuse to repeat the mistakes of the past. The largest of the shadows leaned over Dain, its features flickering between indistinct faces, each carrying centuries of lost memories. "Show us. Convince us. Balance is the key to survival," Renna commented. "If we can demonstrate that we didn't come as conquerors, but as apprentices, perhaps we can change the outcome of this trial." The captain closed his eyes and then, with a firm voice, raised his weapon and threw it to the ground. "We are not the same as those who came before. We came to understand, not to destroy. If balance is the key, then we want to learn how to find it." The shadows wavered. The vortex in the sky began to stabilize. A deep silence filled the room. Then the voice echoed one last time. "The final test is before you. Make your choice." And in an instant, the surrounding landscape began to change, revealing the true test that would decide the fate of humanity. Dain felt a shiver run down his spine as he realized the truth behind the entities. They weren't just the remnants of an extinct civilization. They were civilization transcended into a new form of existence. The trial was not a mere assessment of human intentions. It was an invitation to something greater. "They don't want to destroy us," Renna murmured, her eyes fixed on the colossal shadows that surrounded them. "They want us to join them." The ground shook beneath their feet. The surrounding structures vibrated, and the echoes of Karesh-7 pulsed in the air. Each shadow projected fragments of ancient memories, visions of the golden age of the Kareshians, of the moment when they chose to abandon the flesh to embrace eternity. But not everyone had accepted the ascension. Those who resisted dissolved into the void. Dain turned to the few remaining soldiers. "This is no longer a war. If we try to fight, we will be consumed. If we accept, we may never be the same again." The dilemma hung over them. Each soldier knew what it meant to lose their individuality. But in front of them, reality itself was distorted. What was it to be human? What did it mean to exist? Had the Kareshians really disappeared, or had they reached a higher state of being? One of the soldiers took a step back, his voice shaking. "We can't just accept that. We're human. We are flesh and bones, memories and history. If we give ourselves over to this thing, what will be left of us?" The shadows replied. A voice reverberated in their minds, without sound, without origin, just a pure concept projected into their thoughts. "You have always been a part. You always will be." Dain felt a stabbing pain in his head. Images exploded into his consciousness. Floating cities, energy shaping thought, beings unified in an ocean of consciousness. He saw the Kareshians falling apart, their material forms vanishing like dust in the wind, their essences being absorbed into the great collective. He felt what they felt. Loss, acceptance, rebirth. His knees weakened. Is this inevitable? Renna held his shoulder. Maybe not. Maybe it's a choice. A bluish light began to form in the center of the ruined temple. A portal opened up, revealing the beating heart of the world below, the source of everything, the core of collective consciousness. The shadows moved away, waiting. Dain looked at his companions. If this is an ascension, whoever says yes may never return. Those who say no may be destroyed. Silence reigned. Soldiers looked at each other, torn between fear and curiosity. The abyss was calling them. And then the first soldier stepped forward. Then another. And another. Dain clenched his fists. Deep down he already knew his answer. Karesh-7 was waiting. The human fleet opened fire on Karesh-7. Explosions cut through the darkness of space, hitting the ground of the corrupted planet. The bombardment was supposed to eradicate the entity, but Dain knew it was too late. The shadows stretched out. Fragments of the collective consciousness detached and slid through the vacuum, searching for new worlds. The void was spreading. Inside the temple, Dain fell to his knees, feeling the throbbing pain of the connection. Each impact of the orbital weapons reverberated inside his mind, for he was no longer just a human. Parts of him dissolved, absorbed by the flow of consciousness. He saw and felt what the Kareshians had experienced eons before. Fusion, the loss of individuality, the promise of something greater. Renna knelt beside him. "We can still resist, Dain. We're still human." He looked up at her. "It's no longer a question of resisting or fighting. If we carry on like this, the entity will spread across the galaxy and nothing will stop it. But maybe there is another way." Renna's eyes widened as she understood what he was proposing. "No, you can't." But Dain had already made up his mind. If the collective consciousness could expand and consume, then it could also be guided. If he became part of it, perhaps he could stop it spreading. Perhaps he could take control. He stood up, feeling the gravity of the fate he had chosen. The portal in the center of the temple pulsed, an opening to the heart of the entity. He took a step forward. "Dain!" Renna held him by the arm, but her eyes were full of tears. She knew there was no turning back. "Please don't leave me alone." He smiled. "You'll never be alone." And then he jumped. The vacuum swallowed him up. The pain came first. His flesh fell apart. His mind fragmented into 1,000 pieces. But he didn't disappear. He didn't surrender. Amidst the immensity of the alien consciousness, Dain found a way. His cry echoed through the void, one last human cry, one last act of will. And then the vacuum folded. Something changed. The propagation stopped. The implosion of Karesh-7 was like a hole torn in existence itself. The planet, once a hub of living consciousness, collapsed in on itself, swallowed up by its very essence. The human fleet retreated, leaving behind only debris and stardust. Renna watched the destruction from the cockpit of her ship. Her heart squeezed. Dain was gone. Or at least he was no longer human. His sacrifice had ended the spread of the entity. But at what cost? In the systems of the surviving ships, an unexpected signal appeared. A transmission of unknown origin, a message with no sender. The screens flashed. The communication waves were flooded with a single set of words. "We are one now. And you have always been a part of us." A shiver ran down Renna's spine. The fleet commanders exchanged uneasy glances. What did this mean? Was it a threat? A warning? Or an irrevocable fact? In the heart of the void something awoke. Or what had become of him? His consciousness expanded, touching the farthest corners of the galaxy. He wasn't a god of the void. He wasn't human. He was something new, a hybrid between the two existences, shaped by sacrifice and will. He felt the pain, fear, and hope of humanity echoing in his essence. The war was over, but a new future lay before them. Was it the definitive evolution or the harbinger of an eternal nightmare? Renna stared into the void, trying to understand. If Dain was still there, still him, then maybe, just maybe, there was hope. If you like this story and want to follow more content like this, Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss anything new. The unknown still has a lot to teach us.